Here at our studio, we often get asked whether someone can have comfort or performance or aerodynamics. And I would argue actually they're not disparate things. We're going to talk today a little bit about how you can not separate those items but actually include them all together. My name's Lee Prescott and I'm the lead fitter here at the Velo Atelier Bicycle Studio and the president of the IBFI. So I often hear people talking about comfort versus performance and what is the correct balance. And actually I would argue that to get performance you need comfort. Comfort equals stability and stability creates performance and consistency. You shouldn't really be talking about power production without stability. Being able to put out huge power for a short period of time isn't massively helpful because you need to be able to put out power consistently and stably through your entire effort and performance. You know, if you're doing a 7-hour ride, being super powerful and aerodynamic for 20 minutes isn't really a lot of help. Or what we're talking about today is all about how to create comfort to provide the stability which will give you the performance. Don't mistake power production for effectiveness. So I think to start this conversation, the first thing we actually need to do is define what we mean by performance. I think too often people define it as a very small amount of, maximum peak power output or maximum speed and that sort of stuff. But actually, your performance and your ideal target performance should be based around what your end goal is. If your end goal is to do, an Ironman, that means being consistent power output over a long period of time and actually then also saving the body ready for a run. If we're talking about track sprinting, that's a very different performance requirement. So before we even consider in a bike fit what performance we're after, we need to work out actually what it is that you're trying to achieve. That way we're going to look at the correct metric. Is it something that you're going to need to try and hold for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 3 hours, 4 hours? And that will really determine what that level of performance is when we're looking at you on the bike. There's lots of different techniques that we can use here in the studio to measure performance, heart rate, pedaling efficiency, power outputs, speed. But I think the key thing that is the most important when we're looking at a position is the duration that position needs to be held for while still producing stable, repeatable performances. So, in your own life, in your own riding, if you're playing around with your position yourself, what you really should be thinking about is how long do I need to hold this position? Am I doing 10-mile TT and need to hold the position with good consistent power output for 20 minutes? Or am I doing club runs and need to be comfortable and be able to climb for up to 4 or 5 hours? That's the key question before you really start looking at how aggressive your position can or should be. So when we are looking at a position and specifically looking at kind of what aerodynamic gain we can position someone into, we have to consider their physiology. Okay, the more aggressive a position, the more a pelvis is going to rotate, the more the hip angle is going to close up, and the more weight is going to be put onto the upper body. So we need to make sure that whatever position we're putting people into is sustainable for their physiology, their level of joint movement, and and upper body strength. We also need to make sure that we don't, when we position someone more aggressively, that we don't remove their ability to produce power consistently. Too often we've had people come in who've played around with super aggressive positions that, albeit are potentially very aerodynamic, don't allow them to actually get the power to the pedal. And it's a balancing act. There's a level at which reducing power output to increase aerodynamics is acceptable, but there becomes a tipping point. Ideally, it's the sort of thing we would measure in the wind tunnel down in Silverstone, but a lot of work can be done here in the studio just to define kind of that tipping point, because it's very easy to see as a fitter when that stability reduces and that ability to produce repeatable power decreases. When we're looking at what position to put you into, we also need to consider what style of riding. Someone doing more dynamic riding, i.e. things like gravel, off-road, mountain bike, they're going to benefit far more from increased stability than aerodynamics. So there's a balancing point within the discipline as well. Even within gravel now, there's a continuum of aerodynamic requirement, from the high-end gravel racing to the kind of bike packing end. One end doesn't really require any aerodynamics, and the other end is now being fueled with aerodynamic race bikes and things like that. So you have to consider what the end purpose is before considering a position. And I think one of the other things to bear in mind is, just because a pro can do it doesn't mean that that's something you should copy. They're probably doing an incredible amount of strength and conditioning and stretching work every day. If you want to copy a pro, you need to copy all of their aspects, not just their position. So when we're considering how to position you and how to get that best balance between the aerodynamic gain and the comfort and stability that's going to give you power output, there's lots of different aspects we can look at. Obviously, the saddle position in relationship to the cranks is important for power production and pelvic stability. If you consider your pelvis is in essence your chassis that all of the muscles in the lower leg are going to pull against. So if that's nice and stable and secure and well positioned on the saddle, your chassis is going to be much stiffer and produce a much cleaner, more sustainable power output. Also, that's the foundation for the upper body. So if your pelvis isn't stable, then the upper body can't stabilise either. Too often we see people holding themselves up with their arms, and actually what we really want is for the pelvis to be stable, and then this whole corset of muscle here is the bit that's holding you up, just like I'm currently holding myself up with it. I'm not currently using my arms to hold myself. That's because my pelvis is currently stable, and that's what we need to try and achieve on the saddle as well. Other things that we can look at, crank length can have an influence on the amount of hip closure and the defined cadence within a position. And then obviously bar, reach and drop have a huge impact on the frontal area in terms of the aerodynamics, but also the reach and drop are incredibly important for the control of the bike, which people often forget. Just being like super stretched out might make you more aerodynamic, but it's not sustainable if you can't steer properly and get around corners. A lot of race winning moves are done in the corners, not on descents. So one of the other key things that we look at when we're doing a fit with somebody is what the position looks like once the rider's started to fatigue. It's a really key important thing here that a lot of people miss. Being able to hold a nice correct posture for the 5 minutes we're taking a little bit of video footage is great, but what happens after minute 5, after minute 10, after minute 60? Can that position still be held comfortably? That's why having a fit process that actually goes over multiple visits is quite useful sometimes, especially on more problematic positioning issues. And being able to see how sustainable that position is over a period of time is incredibly useful as a fitter. The other thing to consider is that our position will change over time. As our fitness increases or decreases, as our muscle condition changes over time, as we age, injury, new equipment, all of these things have an influence on your position and are key indicators of when a little top-up fit is required. So in terms of some practical takeaways for you from this, I think the key thing here is when you're playing around with your position, the key question for you to ask yourself is, can I hold this position consistently for the period I'm going to use it? Okay. I think the key thing here is comfort, supports consistency, and consistency leads to performance. All right, so don't put yourself into a position that looks incredibly cool for 5 minutes, because it won't look cool when you're blowing going up the first hill. So you should be asking yourself, can I, in this new position that I've put myself in, can I ride longer? Can I ride more comfortably? Can I ride with more power? Hopefully the answer is all three. If you need any more assistance with your bike fitting journey, please feel free to head to the IBFI website, where you'll find any good certified fitter in your local area, and that's global. So anyone watching outside of the UK, please also look on there and you'll see your local certified fitter.